Roland replies, "My desire becomes all the greater. May it never please the Lord God and his angels that France should ever lose its fame because of me. I prefer to die than to suffer shame. For the fine blows we strike, the emperor loves us all the more." Roland is brave, and Oliver is wise. Both are marvelous vassals. That is from the Song of Roland. Welcome to Hot Takes on the Classics. My name is Tim McIntosh, and I am joined by Emily Maeda for this week's episode on the Song of Roland and the Chivalric Code. Hello, Emily.
Hey, Tim. How's it going?
Great. How are you doing?
I am doing real well. Really excited about Song of Roland.
We are squarely in the medieval world, aren't we, Emily?
We sure are.
Full of heroes. Like last week, we talked about Beowulf, this kind of heroic code, and now here we are talking about a heroic code again with the Song of Roland and the Chivalric Code.
Yeah, I'm so glad we did them together or nearby each other, because the Song of Roland really kind of takes up similar themes as Beowulf. But this is in France, not in the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms or
right.
Scandinavia. So a different set of priorities, and slightly, but still wrestling. What is the Christian hero supposed to look like? So I have a question for you.
Okay, I'm ready.
This is a little bit of a funny question. I wasn't quite sure how you would answer it, but it has a point. So, do you have a historical crush? Do you have a crush on anybody in history?
In male or female, like somebody could be a male, I'm just like, oh, I wish I could be like him, something like that? Or does it need to be a female?
No. I know. That's why I was like, well, shoot, maybe this doesn't work so well for him. It can be either. I'm not going to prioritize.
I love Abraham Lincoln.
What?
I mean, I know it's not that long ago, 150 years ago. What's wrong with Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah,
you have a complaint against Abraham Lincoln?
No, I just really did not expect that. So I'm a little bit surprised, but keep going.
I just think I just love him.
He's remarkable.
Love him. He's absolutely remarkable.
Yeah.
And I've read a few biographies on him, and every biography I read, the biographer is always kind of spellbound by how magnificent he is. By him, right? Okay,
all right. Well, that's a good answer. That's a good answer.
So, Emily, you must have a historical crush. Tell us about it.
Well, it was a little bit of a self-serving question because I do in fact have a historical crush, which I didn't know I had until students pointed this out to me. So when I teach Charlemagne in my Western Civ class, I wax eloquent about him. I really do love and admire him. So one of my students said to me one day, Mrs. Maeda, do you have a crush on Charlemagne?
And the answer was yes.
Well, I kind of had to think about it. And then I said, well, I guess I do. I guess if there was somebody to have a crush on, I guess I kind of have a crush on Charlemagne. So there you go. So
okay, now I'm curious about Charlemagne and the Song of Roland.
Okay, so lots of people kind of say maybe it should be the Song of Charlemagne and not the Song of Roland.
Oh,
because Roland dies halfway through, but Charlemagne is there from beginning to end. So that's the reference. So should we get into the Song of Roland?
Yeah, I want to. Let's do it.
Okay. I should say at the outset that I feel pretty comfortable with Italian and Spanish and Latin pronunciation, but I do not feel comfortable with French, and I apologize in advance for my pronunciation. How are you with French pronunciation?
I am very good at imitating a French person speaking because I had a French foreign exchange student. And Thibaut, if you're listening, I think of you often. And sometimes when Thibaut was really tired at the end of the day of trying to speak English, I would slip into his native tongue enunciation.
Oh,
and that
interesting.
would communicate clearly. So I'm pretty good at imitating a French accent, but not great at reading it. I'm not great at reading it.
We might leave it up to any French listeners as to how well you imitate it, but I'll try my best.
Okay, great.
So you can try too. Chanson de Roland.
Chanson de Roland.
Okay, so it's an old French tale. It's told in the style of a ballad or a song, but it's very similar to the ancient epics and shares a lot with Beowulf because all of these are orally passed down. So you made the case that, of course, Beowulf is an older tale, but was most likely composed by one artist. In the same way, the Song of Roland was most likely the same. Passed down to people through word of mouth, but also what we have now was written down by one author. But it is based on actual fact. So here we get the historical resonance. You ready?
Yes.
So Charlemagne did, in fact, go to Spain in the year 777. What a great number. 777. So great. At the request of Saracens who wanted help against other Muslims. So Saracens are the Muslim rulers of Spain, up until the time of Frederick and Isabella. So they join forces, Charlemagne and the other Saracens, and they defeat two cities, Gerona and Pamplona. And then they march on Saragossa, but they're not able to defeat it. So Charlemagne is then called back to the north because he was in a war against the Saxons and he has to go back to fight them. And as he marches north, the rear guard of his army is attacked in a narrow pass and slaughtered by Basque warriors. So not Muslim warriors, but Basque warriors. And this is called the Battle of Roncevaux. How are you going to say that with your
Roncevaux?
Roncevaux.
I think I just nailed it. Yeah.
Thank you. So there are historical references to Sir Roland being defeated there. And there's a couple of different references to it, but that's all that's sort of said about it. And it's not kind of a major thing. It's a pretty minor, in the grand scope of Charlemagne's battles, it's kind of a minor battle, but it is notable because he is, they are defeated in this very horrible way. Because you can imagine, in a narrow pass, there's nowhere for the army to go. So, but the story doesn't resurface until about the time of the First Crusade, which is in 1099.
Oh.
Interesting.
So Charlemagne goes to Spain, 777. There's this little battle, but then 300 years later, during the First Crusade, this story about Charlemagne kind of gets popular again.
Yeah, it comes to the fore, and it makes a lot of sense why it does. So I don't know if you know this, but Dorothy Sayers has a translation of the Song of Roland. Did you know that?
Really? Oh, you got to tell us who Dorothy Sayers is.
Okay, Dorothy Sayers is part of the Inklings, was part of the Inklings. They're not currently alive. So that would be C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Charles Williams, who are some of the other ones I'm forgetting now. But they were all, the intelligentsia of Oxford. They were all Christians eventually with C.S. Lewis, and they all met together and worked together. So she was one of the early women to go to Oxford. She was, valued as a great thinker. So she translates this, and this is what she says about the tale in her introduction. She says, this is a little bit long, but I think it's really important, and it shows how the Song of Roland sort of comes to be. So this is what she writes. She says, after the battle, the tale of Roland appears to go underground for some 200 years. When it comes again to the surface, it has undergone a transformation which might astonish us if we had not seen much the same thing happen to the tale of the wars of King Arthur. The magic of legend has been at work, and the small historic event has swollen to a vast epic of heroic proportions and strong ideological significance. So isn't that great?
That's really fascinating. That's really great. Yeah.
So this is what she says. This is how she says it gets transformed. So Charlemagne, who was actually 38 at the time of his expedition into Spain, has become a great hierarchic figure 200 years old, the snowy bearded king, the sacred emperor, the champion of Christendom. Okay, so that's Charlemagne. He's leading it against the Saracens, the warlord whose conquests extend throughout the civilized world. The expedition itself has become a major episode in the great conflict between Cross and Crescent, or Christians and Muslims.
Oh.
And the marauding Basques have been changed and magnified into an enormous army of many thousand Saracens. So
Fascinating. Okay, hold on. Before we go on, Emily, I feel like we need to do a little touch-up on Charlemagne. So
okay.
we entered the medieval world when Rome fell. One of the books that we covered is City of God by the church father Augustine, and he writes this theological treatise about, hey, the world is not ending just because Rome is ending. Yeah, Rome, the eternal city, the kind of like one of the pinnacles of civilization, is being marauded by
the Visigoths.
The Visigoths. And then that's the kind of like keynote moment where we leave the ancient world and we enter the medieval world. And now the mistake is to think the medieval world was just kind of like all of one piece.
Exactly. It was not of one piece.
Tell us, 300 years after the fall of Rome, tell us who Charlemagne is and like what his importance is in the medieval world.
Yeah, I should have said that sooner. So Charlemagne comes out of the Franks, and he is a descendant of Chivalric, right? Or what's his other name? They all have a bunch of different names. You can know them by different ones. But then Chivalric converts to Christianity. He's the king of the Franks. And there's, different sort of dynasties within the kings of the Franks. But eventually Charlemagne comes to the top. And Charlemagne simply means Charles the Great. That's all it means. So he establishes himself as a strong lord. And it's actually interesting because he is able to command more strength than a lot of the Frankish kings who are sort of weakened by their vassals, the people under them, right? But Charlemagne is able to... He establishes the Frankish kingdom. And Charlemagne, the reason I love him, should I just say the reason I love him?
Yeah.
So when he becomes king, he understands that he hasn't been given this role just to aggrandize himself. He's been given this role to help his people. So he is an image. He is an image. Like, if there were an ideal king, I think Charlemagne is probably it, right? Because he says, I love God. I serve God. Therefore, I need to help my people do the same. So he puts in place a huge educational renaissance. He travels throughout his kingdom to make sure that people are learning to read and write. He himself never learns to write.
Was illiterate,
he never
right?
learns to...
Yeah.
I think he learns to read, that he never writes.
Okay.
So he takes it upon himself to make sure that his people are trained. And then he says, not only that, but my people don't have good priests. So I have got to take it very seriously that we train priests who can lead the people in their faith. So, I mean, he makes it his life goal to ennoble his people. I mean, what more can you want from a king?
I think he and Henry V are going to be up there for like leaders we respect. Henry V, as appears in Shakespeare, which is going to be the next podcast that we do, are going to be two of the real high points in European rule, two of the leaders that we respect the most. I want to say one thing, like, we're always, when reading the classics, importing our own mindset in like kind of pasting our mindset onto these old books. That's only natural. One thing I think that's really key to remember about the medieval world is that Rome was a unifying, centralized presence in Europe. It built all these roads. It helped establish a common language for trade. It helped establish common currency for trade, for buying and trade. So when that breaks down, you get the establishment of a bunch of little fiefdoms, a bunch of little like mini kings instead of like one great king, or in the case of the Romans, one great emperor. So part of what's significant about Charlemagne is that he was one of many little kings, but his rise and his kind of consolidation of power gathers lots of these fiefdoms underneath him. But that's relatively rare for in the medieval world. Yeah. So just one more thing about that. Oftentimes the fiefdoms are connected together through the military. So a mini-king goes to his dukes and managers and says, hey, listen, if we get attacked by the neighboring fiefdom, will you supply knights to defend our territory? They say yes, and he's great. So that's the way that you kind of connect outside of your fief and the way that you consolidate power within your fief. But Charlemagne has done more than just consolidate army power within his little fief. He has gathered power across many fiefs.
Which is what you're bringing up, the vast and tangled web of feudalism, which it doesn't have an easy definition. But what you just said was the definition of, but feudalism contains within itself the idea that of mutual interdependence. So you may be a king and you have vassals that pledge their liege to you, but then you also have responsibilities to the vassals. You can't just treat the vassals any way you want. There's a whole code governing this. So the thing that Charlemagne is able to do, and this is what doesn't happen to, like you said, many of the smaller kingdoms, the king or the duke or whoever's in charge is weakened by his obligations to his nobles, and his nobles can call him in if they don't, they can band together and go against him. Yeah. Charlemagne is able to bring, because of like the strength of who he was, not only in person, but also in war, he was able to command greater strength than the previous king, and better than his sons will as well. Because again, the Franks will lose power through sort of vassalage issues. But good thing you brought up the Roman Empire, because Charlemagne is crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 800, right? So he does see himself, now we might add, somewhat problematically, he does see himself as reestablishing the Roman Empire. He certainly does.
Well, so it's kind of like it's still in people's imaginations that there was a time 300 years ago when all of this continent was sort of united under one central ruler. So if you're going to reestablish yourself as a single ruler over this vast territory, well, that's the nearest at hand memory that Europeans would have. So it does make sense. It is problematic, but it does make sense.
It does. And I mean, so I'll now say the faults of Charlemagne.
Right.
He does carry on murderous wars. When he goes in to subdue the Saxons, it is not with the sword of the cross. No, he goes in with a real sword. So we talked about this a little bit in Beowulf, but the same tension applies here. Christianity has come to these honor-bound tribes. The Franks are just a tribe. What do you do with the Christian message of sublimating violence? What do you do with that when you are a heroic-based culture? It's real tricky, right? It's
really tricky.
And we saw that with Beowulf. Same thing. Like they're going back and forth and Christianity's pulling on them, but they still really kind of hold to this honor code. And that is certainly true here. I mean, and we're going to see it sort of more problematically. We'll talk about the beginnings of the Crusade in this, the Crusades. And, it's a real problem. It's a real problem.
Just to kind of like put a fine point on it, later in European history, the honor code, you get into problems like this. My honor is so bound up with my kind of social standing that if I am insulted in some grave way by my contemporary, I will challenge that person to a duel. Which sounds today completely like an overboard reaction. Like, why are you going nuclear because someone, I don't know, like spat at your shoes or something like that? Are you going to kill?
Get a lawyer and sue him. Get a lawyer and sue him.
That's like that's the more logical. But for them, it was not just kind of like an insult to my individuality. It was my whole social standing was bound up in my being recognized as worthy of honor. And so if you're going to take that from me, you're threatening my very life. Now I'm going to threaten your life with a pistol at 10 paces, right?
Yeah, because
like that's kind of like...
And that's happening here. I mean, that's part of the chivalric code, right?
Yeah.
The chivalric code comes to be because in Europe, you've got marauding bands of knights. You know, I mean, this is a simplification, of course, but you've got people going around fighting over slights to reputation.
Yeah,
and,
right.
I mean, for other complex factors too, like who's being employed and all of these other things. But the Crusades become a way to sort of harness that warring spirit towards an end that seems better than one another, right? I mean, that is definitely an impulse. Rather than fighting each other, why don't we go fight the infidel, right?
Right.
All of it's problematic. Like, I'm not saying this is a good thing. This is problematic.
We're just recognizing where it comes from.
Right, exactly. Okay, so that is the setting of the story. So it's worked its way into legend, and now you can see that even though Charlemagne's rearguard was not killed by Muslims, they were killed by Basques, it now becomes helpful to have the Muslims as killing them, right?
Right.
Because that's going to feed into the general fervor of the Crusades. Like, the Muslims are taking, they are threatening Constantinople. They have taken over Jerusalem. We must go and do something about this. So that's the setting of the Song of Roland. Interesting. Okay, so here's another interesting thing. We talked about Beowulf. They're both poetry, but Beowulf being very Anglo-Saxon. This is in iambic meter. So this is where we get the English, eventually, the English emphasis on the iambic. Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. What all of our poetry has been written in.
Yep.
Here it starts. So
how fascinating. Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating? Yeah, and this is Old French. I don't know Old French, but it's like Old English, right? It's the language before what we currently have, or it's develops out of it. So here's the story. I mean, you already know the story, sort of, but there's interesting elements. Dorothy Sayers says that whoever the poet is, I'm going to paraphrase her and say that the poet gives the events to us in simplicity. He just reports, but he does report emotional states of being, but there's not a commentary on it. It is left for us to kind of decide what we think about this. But there's a really interesting undercurrent in the story that he gives us, and it involves Roland's stepfather. There's not an evil stepmother, but there is an evil stepfather.
Ooh.
Oh, exciting. Okay, so the story opens. The Saracen ruler has decided that he wants Charlemagne to go away. Marcel is his name? Am I saying it right?
Sure.
Who knows?
Sure.
Marcel. Sorry, everybody. He sues for peace with Charlemagne. So it opens. Charlemagne has his 12 peers there to counsel him. Among them is Roland and his dear friend Oliver. And they all say, oh, be very careful. This seems to be a trap. But, he's been defeated. Let's accept his terms and let's get out of here. But who will go and carry the message? So Roland is a brash young knight. You feel his sort of, we know many young men who could fit into this camp, or who through history have fit into this camp. He's ready. Right. He's ready to go. So Charlemagne turns him down. Roland is also Charlemagne's nephew in this. But don't forget, Charlemagne is 200 years old here, which is really funny. He's turned down. And Charlemagne says, none of you peers are going to go. Let's nominate somebody else. So Roland nominates his stepfather, Ganelon. And Ganelon is angry and takes it as a slight that Roland has nominated him. And then Roland kind of is like, well, if you don't want to go, I'll go. But of course,
Emily, the reason that Ganelon is insulted, is it because it's beneath his station to be a messenger?
We are not given that.
It's hidden from us.
It's hidden from us. He does mention that it's going to be dangerous, but so it's not given to us, but there is this feeling of like Roland is shoving him forward and he doesn't want to be put forward. But he's forced now into agreeing to go because Charlemagne has asked him. So he says here, can I just read it to you?
Please, yeah.
He says, "My lord barons, whom can we send to the Saracens?" And Roland says, "Well, I'll go." And he says, "No." And then Roland says, "It will be Ganelon, my stepfather." And the Franks say, "He can do this well. If he is not chosen, no wiser man will be sent." So they approved the choice of Ganelon.
Right.
Count Ganelon was deeply distressed. He throws down his great marten fur from his shoulders and stood there in his tunic of silk. His eyes flashed. His face was very fierce. His body was noble, his torso broad. So handsome was he that all his peers gazed at him. He said to Roland, "You fool, why are you so angry? Everyone knows that I'm your stepfather, and yet you have named me to go to Marseille. If God grants that I return from there, I shall stir up against you such a great feud that it will last for the rest of your life." Roland replies, "I hear arrogant and foolish words. Everyone knows that I fear no threat. But it must be a wise man who delivers the message. If the king desires it, I am ready to perform the task for you." So we don't get commentary, but of course there is bad blood here, right? And Ganelon is mad. But you also get from the tale that people respect him. So it isn't quite clear. But he also doesn't offer to go before Roland. So in some ways, Roland has maybe, by putting himself forward first, like thrown questions as to the courage of Ganelon. And Ganelon does not want to go, but he will go because Charlemagne has asked. And he has to because of the relationship that they have of king and vassal, right?
Yes, right.
So, but then there's this really interesting thing, and I'm going to bring this up because it's going to show up in Henry V, which we are going to do soon.
I love it.
The emperor holds out his right glove to him, but Count Ganelon would rather not have been there. When he should have received it, it fell to the ground.
So, no.
Do you know what scene I'm thinking of in Henry V?
I think I do.
The scene with when they're around the campfire and one of his soldiers, not knowing it's Henry V, slaps him with his glove. Do you remember?
Yep.
Because this is a sign of loyalty and respect, right, to the king. So that's not a good scene. So we know that Ganelon is mad. Ganelon does go and relay the message to the Saracens, but in the going, he says, "I will betray Roland to you. Roland will offer to stay behind in the rear guard, and I will betray him to you, and you can kill Roland, which will help me because I do not like him." So Ganelon delivers the message, goes back to Charlemagne. Yes, it's been accepted. The terms are agreed to. Let's return to France. Ganelon returns to France with Charlemagne. Of course, our young and fierce warrior, Roland, does offer to stay behind, and he keeps Oliver, his dear friend, and the Archbishop, who is another, sainted warrior. Interesting. And they stay behind, and they are attacked. So then we get a whole description of the battle. And do you know that children's song, folk tune, "The Fox Went Out on a Chilly Night"? You know that?
No, I don't.
You don't know that? Like, "Fox went out on a chilly night, prayed to the Lord for to give him sight." Oh my gosh, where were you raised?
I don't know. Not in a barn. I started to say in a barn, but apparently not in a barn. If I had been raised in a barn, I would know the song.
Anyway, I say that to you because it's sung by like Willie Guthrie or something. Yeah, it's like a folk tune, but it has it has this repeated phrase that keeps coming back, and the battle is reported in such a way where you have these refrains that keep coming back. So you get the feeling that it really was probably sung at points, right? Because you get a repeated chorus that keeps coming back. So the description of the battle is a lot like the Iliad. That Then their neck
Super
was severed,
gory.
chopped
Yeah.
through the middle, down to the crotch. Down he falls.
Purple
trapped.
viscera vomited forth from his severed. Yeah, I remember this for sure.
Yes. So at the start of the battle, Oliver, Roland's friend, says, blow your horn. Blow your horn. Tell Charlemagne we're in trouble. Blow your horn. And Roland says, absolutely not. We are strong. We are brave. We can do this. Like any young man that you might know, right? We are strong. We can do this. And he doesn't. And then it's just terrible because they're severely outnumbered. Of course, as we remember Sayre saying, it's an army of 100,000 to 20,000, right? So they're outnumbered. So they fight. He's got his trusty sword, Durendal, another echo of Beowulf. Remember how all the swords are named in Beowulf?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, right.
And Oliver has his Harthaclear, also a sword, and they fight and they fight and they fight. But it doesn't matter because there are too many. So they are getting slaughtered. So eventually, as the, night after night falls, they fall gloriously, they fall bravely. The Archbishop says, you two will be in heaven this day because you have fought in this holy fight. So we're getting echoes of holy war here.
Right.
Roland decides he's going to blow his horn. And now Oliver is mad because he says, you didn't do it when you should have done it. You didn't do it because you had so much hubris. And now it's shameful of you to do it. You should not blow the horn. You should just die because that's what's going to happen here. But he blows it. And it's really important that he blows it. When he blows it, his temple split apart. Just like wild. And Charlemagne hears it. And Ganelon is, of course, back with Charlemagne. And Ganelon says, oh, no, you don't. You don't hear anything. And he says, no, I hear it. And if I hear it, it means Roland is fighting and Roland is in trouble. And another one of the lords says, you are right. And this man has betrayed Roland, Ganelon. And so Charlemagne turns around and rides back. But of course, can you imagine? Will Charlemagne get there in time to save Roland? What's your guess? No, you're right. He does not. He comes back and he finds his people slaughtered, and Roland's dying breath is just agonizing and lasts like over 2 or 3 pages. One of the Saracens wants to take his sword because his sword is of such great repute, and Roland tries to destroy it, but he can't destroy it. It's such a strong sword. So he kills the guy in his last dying breath. He kills the guy who's trying to take his sword, and he dies with honor without his sword being taken. So he makes it, Charlemagne sees this. He is brokenhearted for his brave nephew who has given his life in this heroic but doomed struggle. And then Ganelon, he goes back to France. Ganelon is taken back to France. He is put on trial. Through a course of events, it's made clear that he is a traitor and has betrayed Roland, and he is drawn and quartered. His limbs are ripped off one by one. And that is the end. So there you go. The Song of Roland.
Emily, I've got to ask this. This story occurs during the rule of Charlemagne, and then it kind of goes away for a couple of 100 years, and then it comes back around the time of the Crusade. And Dorothy Sayers, says this is not the first time a story like this has occurred, that it kind of disappears from the public consciousness and then comes back. What is the thing about Roland that was so cherished 200 years after his life? What was he emblematic of?
I mean, I think he's...
Do you know?
I mean, I'm going to speculate because nobody gives a definitive answer. But I think he's emblematic of the... I'm going to say ideal Christian knight. But of course, his foibles are made clear in the song, right? it is made clear that he's rash and he's prideful. And yet for those faults, he still embodies a brave, he has fortitude and courage. He has love for his fellow knights. He has great love for his Lord Charlemagne. He lays down his life and doesn't refuse to give up his life for honor and for what his Lord has called him to. So in those ways, and where Beowulf, you kind of feel like Christianity is tacked on. In here, Roland, professes his love of Christ, says that he's motivated.
So it's all part of like it's clearly part of like the Christian world. It's not Christian world plus Nordic. Like,
exactly.
Even this is kind of like honor code. That's probably like leftover from.
Oh, it's so honor code. It's honor code. And then, I mean, and if you take it in light of the Crusades, right, then he appears to be a crusading knight, which like is problematic. This is problematic because as Augustine says, like there's no way that Augustine is holding this up as kind of like a great thing. But then again, too, we are not, they are feeling the push of the Saracens from Spain, the Turks in the East, right? They are feeling the push of this. So, it is a clash of civilizations, but I guess that's the question. What is the Christian response? We would all now see the response of the Crusades as deeply problematic. But let me just read this to you from Pope Urban when he calls the First Crusade, which seems to be for a noble purpose because Jerusalem has been taken over and Constantinople is under threat, right? So he says this: "Let your minds be stirred to bravery by the deeds of your forefathers and by the efficiency and greatness of Charlemagne and of Ludwig his son, and of the other kings who have destroyed Turkish kingdoms and established Christianity in their lands. You should be moved, especially by the holy grave of our Lord and Savior, which is now held by unclean peoples and by the holy places which are treated with dishonor. Oh, bravest knights, descendants of unconquered ancestors, do not be weaker than they, but remember their courage. If you are kept back by your love for your children, relatives, and wives, remember what the Lord says in his gospel: he that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me." So you can see, right? Roland in so many ways is an embodiment of that.
Creative interpretation. Very creative interpretation, Emily.
Yeah. I think it's a tale that's time had come, right? When it resurfaces, it was time for this tale to be made known because everybody loves like The Last Stand. I mean, think about how many American tales we have of The Last Stand. Like, remember the Alamo, right? Like everybody finds a last stand heroic. So Roland takes this outsized role because here was a last stand that didn't go well, right? But everybody loves that. Everybody finds that moving. Like, do you stand to the end? Are you courageous even in the face of death? If you are, then you're a true knight, right? You don't lose it at the moment when you're put to the test. You conquer. You know what I'm saying? So I think that is why the Song of Roland comes to be, again, important. So I'm always thinking about this. What do we learn about war? So I've got some things that I think are important about what we learn about war. Are you thinking of anything, Tim? Okay, I'll just start with mine. So here we go. War is brutal. War is brutal, but it calls forth the best in the true warrior. The true warrior is really shown by the testing of war. This is the moment of the Christian knight being born, and that's both for good and for ill. Pope Urban's address, in light of the Muslims pushing on the Eastern Empire, calls forth the Christian knight, and it's mainly for ill. The Crusades are not a glorious moment. The Crusades end up weakening the Eastern Empire more than they help it. So that is, not great. And in this, we see the full flourishing of feudal arrangements. So we're going to see feudalism in Henry V. Roland is a vassal, but he is a vassal of kind of the best the Christian feudal tradition had to offer. I'm a fan of Charlemagne. For all of his faults, I still find Charlemagne a moving and heroic figure. And Roland is exemplary of this honor code and of sort of, the greatest that could be expected from it. But it is the honor code sort of mixed with Christianity, and therefore it has mixed results. So, with all of that said about the brutality of war that we hear about in the Song of Roland, what is it that we learn about war from reading
Emily,
this?
What is it? What do we learn about war? Tell us.
Well, I'll tell you again. War is brutal. How about that? War is brutal. But
that's a theme. That's a theme to this season. War is brutal.
Pretty good. But because it is brutal, it calls forth the best in the true warrior, right? Like it has this enervating effect on the warrior. I think also in this is the first time that we have the Christian knight, right? For better and for ill. I'm not sure if it's really for better, mostly for ill.
Yeah.
Mostly for ill. And we can see
and mostly for ill because it's kind of like collapsing together two things that are not easily interwoven.
Exactly.
Like, turn the other cheek combined with slaughter the enemies of right.
Yeah. I mean, because there is one point in the Song of Roland where the Archbishop says, if you die today, you will be in paradise. And like, whoa, that sounds awfully close to Muslim conceptions of war, right? Or other things. So we've moved away from the Psychomachia, where Prudentius is urging warfare is properly understood as something within oneself, right? Like the war of the virtues.
Yeah, right.
And this is full flowering of warfare as something against others, right? Which is going to have really painful consequences coming down.
And I just want to be clear, like the objection that we have here between is, how do I say this? It's not that there is never a time to take up a righteous cause using strength and the threat of the sword. It's just that when Christianity and the kind of like brutality of war get mushed together under one kind of holy baptized concept, that's where it starts just getting really...
That's where Christianity loses, right?
Right.
That's where Christianity loses. And I mean, it's a problem of the Middle Ages because the early Christians, pacifism was emphasized. There's so many stories of Christian saints who are soldiers in the Roman army who say, I will no longer fight for man, I will fight for God, right? And the implication is taking up arms is problematic. And in here, it's sort of glorified. So that has problematic things that come out of it, because one of the things that comes out of it is the Crusades, right? That's the Crusades. And the Crusades end up wreaking so much havoc, not just on Muslims, but also on other Christians, right? Which is problematic. So
can you tell anything about that part of the story, kind of Christians?
Well, the Western Christians sack Constantinople, right? Which is the seat of the Eastern Church. So that's not so great. And what else do we learn about war? We see war now within a feudal context, right? This is very feudal. And that's going to be at play even in some of the stories that we are going to look at next, like Henry V. Like, what is your duty as a vassal to your lord?
Yeah.
So we see that here. in a, like a very strong and noble way. And this is like sort of the similar stories of Arthur and his knights, right? There's a lot of stories sort of in the same vein as Roland. We're not dealing with Arthur and the tales of the Round Table, but this is in the spirit of that. So I'm on to my hot take.
Oh, I'm ready.
Hot take. This isn't. We've had some warm takes, and I'm going to put this in the category of a warm take as well.
Okay.
This isn't the hottest take on anything.
This is not like you're reaching to the stove and you forgot that the iron skillet has been
exactly
on a flame for 30 minutes. This is like
it's slightly warm, tepid.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot I left that on. Oh yeah, it's a little bit warm.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
here we go.
Here it is. J.R.R. Tolkien took some of his imagery for the sword reality in Lord of the Rings from Song of Roland. There you go. That's my hot take.
Wait, that is not an academically like reinforced idea. That's just like, oh, I see similarities. I'm going to assert this. Is that what you're saying, Emily?
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly what I'm doing.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just struck by it when I was reading, and Roland goes to try and destroy his sword so that the Muslim attacker can't take it, and he can't destroy it because it's so strong. And then his friend Oliver, same thing with his sword plays this. And that's one of the things that strikes you in reading The Lord of the Rings, right? Is the relationship between the warrior and his sword.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like when Aragorn reforms the sword. So anyway,
yeah, it's like it's his moment of maturation. He's fully ready to become king now that his sword is back together. Right.
Right. Exactly. So that really has no basis in anything except my own thinking.
And thus it's a lukewarm take.
That's why it's a warm take.
I like it.
Oh dear.
Okay, hey, we are so glad that you joined us for Hot Takes on the Classics. This has been our show on Roland, the Song of Roland. We want to thank True North, our platform. True North is dedicated to the renewal of the classical education in the United States and abroad. I just want to highlight, Emily, one of the shows that's on True North, the Rafiki Foundation podcast. Rafiki means, in Swahili, friend. And the Rafiki Foundation is dedicated to bringing Bible study and classical Christian education to thousands of schools in Africa and beyond in the next decade. Emily, they have an episode on classical Christian education and African learning traditions. I am very excited to check that one out.
Sounds fascinating.
Doesn't it?
Sure
we
does.
Also want to thank Tom Hagerman, who wrote and performed our music. If you like Tom's solo work, which you're hearing a little bit of here, and you haven't listened to his band Devachka, you should. Thanks for joining us.